Morning, everybody. How we doing today? It's a crazy world we live in. Most of you already know that. The protesters in Minneapolis were told they could peacefully assemble on a stretch of highway yesterday, 35W, right near the college campus, one of the biggest urban campuses in the country. And if they shut the freeways down, so these people could get on the freeway and gather peacefully. And somehow a big tanker truck got on the freeway and barrels into the crowd. And he seemed to have kind of hit the brakes the last second, and no one was seriously hurt. But apparently he was a white nationalist. I guess the Klan, according to some of my sources, was having shootouts with first blacks in North Minneapolis yesterday, and then with the police. There's just a lot of ugly entities in all these uprisings everywhere, trying to invalidate the movement and make it lack any credentials in the eye of the suburban white American, or the rural white American. It's infuriating. It's just trying to prevent their voice from being heard, and trying to keep anybody who would have empathy for them to have that empathy for them. And it's not in the interest of the black community to do the looting and the rioting. It's counterproductive. They all know that. They're not stupid, you know. Not to say there's not some dumb black kids out there doing some dumb shit, and some dumb white kids too, but from most of my friends, it's pretty clear there's a lot of outside forces in here trying to foment, I don't want to call it a civil war yet, but they're trying to foment a real state of fear, chaos, discord. And there was a protest at the White House yesterday. I guess that guy was hiding in the bunker in the basement. Not much of a leader. Ouroboros, the serpent will consume its own tail. Symbol's been around since dawn of time for a reason. That's what always happens. No matter what great idea we put in place for how we're going to govern society and allow man to have some equal footing, and there to be some justice and some wealth distribution, wealth starts to accrue in the hands of the few, and power starts to come with it. And then eventually that power just corrupts, and the wealth concentration gets so great that justice goes out the window, and blindness sets in. And I've been seeing for decades now that that's where empires go. And being that we are one, I don't know how we avoid that trajectory, sad as it may be, but rarely do empires go back on their conquests and say, oh, we're sorry, we'll give you back this, we'll let you have your land back, your resources back. Not really how it works, sadly. Anyway, shit's crazy, you know, and don't believe the lies. Use some common sense. You know, there's no sense for black people to burn down their own neighborhoods, their own shops, their own places of business. This is not what's happening. It's not what happened in Ferguson. It's not what happened in Watts. There's a lot of counterinsurgencies and a lot of other interests at play here. America's in a bad place right now. That being said, they're the ones who brought the blacks over from Africa 500 years ago. They're the ones who incarcerated and kept them in chains for centuries. They're the ones who continued to use slavery a century after the rest of the world had abandoned it. A little piece of information that's poorly known is everybody knows that the American Civil War was fought between the North and the South, and slavery was a large issue. I don't think it was the only issue. I think there's a lot of other things at play. But it was certainly used as a galvanizing issue. But in 1775, there was a landmark court case in England that was talking about abolishing slavery in the entire British Empire. And America is still part of the empire at that point. And this case is in the courts for a while. This guy is suing his owner for his freedom. And the British courts, after it plays out, end up abolishing slavery in the entire British Empire. And of course, England probably has its own trick up its sleeve, knowing that all the colonies and territories that she controls around the planet if they lose slavery, they will lose a lot of their workforce, and building their independence in their own nations will be much more difficult. So it benefits England on some level to say, American colonies, you guys can't have slavery anymore. You'll have to hire and pay people to build your railways, cities, and bridges and towns. But that being said, that's a fairly significant date, 1775, 1776. The American Revolution happens simultaneously with this court case coming down. So there's a whole resistance of American businesses and leaders that say there's no way we can gain our independence from England and be a strong colony with solidarity without the use of slaves. Fuck it. Let's have our independence. Let's go to war. So this nation was built on a war to keep slaves. Look it up. And it's not very much celebrated, of course, but it'd be hard to deny the fact that England outlawing slavery in 1776 and America saying we're not going to be part of the empire anymore, there's a link there without any question in my mind. Today we're going to talk about Bud Powell. Because Bud Powell is a victim of this entire scenario, this entire story. Blacks weren't brought here of their own choice. They were forced over here. They were forced into slavery. They were forced into ugly, awful situations that most of us could never dream of. And the history that's unfolded, we wrote it, we made it, we created it. And we're living and reaping some of that harvest, you know. Bud Powell is a sad story, and I feel like he's a very applicable guy to a lot of what we're about to discuss. He's born on September 27, 1924 in New York City, Harlem, baby. So he's born right in the eye of the monster. Harlem was having the great Harlem Renaissance in the 20s. There was great black writers, black leaders, black political activists, business leaders. Blacks were becoming upwardly mobile in Harlem in the 20s. And it was still a tough place, don't make any mistake about it, but blacks were having their first real renaissance, as it were. And he was born in the middle of that. He is considered, along with Parker, Monk, and Dizzy, to be the real progenitors of bebop. And that doesn't come along until the mid-40s, of course, but he has a troubled childhood, as most kids do. His father was a great stride piano player. He got him piano lessons from a West Indian fellow by the name of Rollins, and that's all they gave him. In the place I looked, it was just one name, Rollins. He played a lot like Fats Waller, played a lot of neighborhood parties and did events. And the first song he learned to play from front to back was Carolina Shout by James P. Johnson. Both of Waller and Johnson were two of the great stride piano players, along with a guy by the name of Willie the Lion Smith. These guys owned Harlem. They were playing in clubs. You could hear these guys battling out night after night. So these guys were a great influence on young Bud Powell. And of course his brother Richie was also a piano player, who we'll talk about more later. In 40s, he starts working his way to the Uptown House in Harlem, and he's hearing Parker doing his first solo gig. You know, Parker's been working with big groups and stuff, but Parker has his own engagement there. And then Monk is a resident piano player at the at the Uptown House. And Uptown is because Harlem's above the park. Harlem is in the north tip of Manhattan. And if you've never been in New York, now's not the time to go, but it's a great city. It's just the pulse of the world. It's such an energetic place. So much of the world's history in the last 200-300 years, New York has its paw prints all over it, and the city lives and breathes that history. The buildings, the monuments, the old Wall Street is the old wall where the Dutch were keeping the British out. The city's just very alive with an incredible amount of the world's history, not American history. You do the history of Dallas or the history of any other city in this country, and you're talking very much an American, very much a localized history. When you talk the history of New York, the last 400 years, you're talking world history. And there's not a lot of cities really that can make that claim. Probably London, probably Paris. Outside of that, last 400 years, I don't think any other places can make that claim. So he's hearing Monk, he's hearing Parker, he's hearing Dizzy, and Monk, being a resident piano player, started introducing young Bud Powell to other players and called him his young protege. that's got to be a fairly nice feather for your cap. But Monk was a real mentor to young Bud Powell. The song "In Walked Bud" was an inspiration of his relationship with young Bud Powell. In '42, he starts playing in some swing bands, notably with a guy by the name of Cootie Williams. And he's having some success with Cootie Williams. In '43, he's offered to join Oscar Pettiford and Dizzy Gillespie's group. His mom tells him no. Keep making that money with Cootie Williams, which of course he does. In '44, he does record a little bit. In '45, he leaves the Cootie Williams group because he gets drunk in Philadelphia after an engagement, wanders down to the Broad Street station. The railway police there find him and beat him to a pulp. And this is what it's like to be a black youth in America. He wasn't burning train cars. He wasn't leading a revolution like resistance. He was simply drunk in public, down by the train yards, and he got beat severely. And then he gets jailed on top of it. You know, you can't just leave me here to bleed. I have to go through the courts and the legal system now. And it just leaves an indelible mark on these young black youth. It's got to be so difficult to live through that stuff. So the city police jail him. He ends up, 10 days after he's released from jail, having a lot of really bad headaches. Just migraines and incapacitating. It was really bad. And he ends up going to Bellevue in New York. And the psych ward, he ends up in another psych ward 60 miles away from the city for 2.5 months. And it's just tough to be a jazz musician and to be plucked away from the scene repeatedly like he ends up being. In '45, '46, he's back in New York, of course, and he does some recordings with guys like Frank Sokolow, Sarah Vaughan. He does some work with Dexter Gordon that ends up on the Savoy label that Dexter Rides Again, which I can show you here real quick. Only part of this has Bud Powell on it, but anything that's going to be from the 40s is going to have multiple sessions on the LP version. He does some work with J.J. Johnson, the great trombone player. He does some work with Sonny Stitt in the mid-40s. He does some work with Fats Navarro and Kluk, Kenny Clark, sorry. He's known for being a great sight reader. Miles Davis said he was one of the most diverse and able-bodied players when he was in his prime. And he could play fast tempos like few players could. Even Monk wasn't the greatest at fast tempos. Piano's a difficult instrument to play at tempo. And Bud was super dexterous. But some of that probably comes from that stride piano playing of Fats Waller and James P. Johnson. The dexterity and virtuosity of those guys was pretty unrivaled. So bebop is developing, and there's no question Bud Powell was one of the first guys who really starts playing the piano like it's a horn. Playing that lead virtuosity, bebop dissection of the chords and making that music just flow with that new river upon river of ideation. Powell was very fluent and just really brought Parker's innovation to the piano, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. He's one of the great players of all time. And it's not all of his recordings reveal that because of some of his health issues in life and drug problems and alcohol. It's, heartbreak. He had a very tough life. And the life of the average African American in this country is always going to be tough. But it does create a kind of certain soul in them and a depth that a lot of white women find attractive. Because most white males in America are pretty pasty, boring pablum, white rice. No soul, no depth. They can talk about NFL football for hours, but they have no concept of struggle or the life that most people live. And so a white woman often finds that depth in black males attractive. And I've seen that play out endless times. Anyway, he's doing this recording in 45, 46. In 47, he gets his first recording session as a leader. And so he gets this first recording session for the Deluxe label in 1947, and it's with Max Roach and Curly Russell. And it never gets issued by Deluxe. 49, the Roost label sweeps it up. and issues it as a series of 78s. And eventually it comes out as this LP, number 2224, in probably about 1956. And it's some great sessions. Like I said, it's one of his first sessions as a leader on piano with Curly Russell, who plays, of course, with Blakey and endless other guys. And again, Roos didn't record it, but that's the situation with a lot of stuff from this era. There's infinite little labels, and bigger labels will buy those recordings, and it still happens today, of course. But this is a great session. It's a great Roos record. Look for this record. You'll hear his young, just vivacity. He just dances around the piano, and it's fantastic hearing Art and Curly Russell and Max Roach just try to keep up with him almost. Usually a piano player is trying to keep up with the drummer. And again, there's some Art Tatum in that. You know, Tatum had that virtuosity at tempo that was effortless, and few people can play like Art Tatum. So if you add Tatum and Fats Waller and James P. Johnson, plus that monk bebop influence, he's now basically bringing that virtuosity to that new format. And it's pretty unrivaled what Bud Powell does when he's on, when he's in his zone. I love this record. It took me a while to track it down, and I've really enjoyed every time I've played it. In 47, Charlie Parker chooses Powell to be part of a session. And this session actually happens to have Miles Davis on it as well. And I think Tommy Potter's on some of the tracks. I think Max Roach is on some of the tracks. So yeah, your rhythm section is Powell, Potter, and Roach with Miles and Charlie Parker. Not a bad group. And they don't record together much after this. Powell and Parker almost have a rivalry, and it spills over on the stage numerous times in the 50s. And they both have demons, without question. And those demons really fueled a lot of respect, but also, I want to show you up. I want everyone to see how great I am. And that's part of jazz always, is that cutting contest. I'm going to be the best. But it's too bad that we don't get more Parker and Powell together, because they certainly share a lot of the same ideations. In 48, he gets into a fight in Harlem outside of a bar with a customer. A glass bottle gets shattered above his eye, and he ends up back in the hospital. The Harlem police found him incoherent and rambunctious. Not a good way to be if you're a young black male in Harlem or anywhere in the country. Although I'm guessing you would much rather be found a black male rambunctious and incoherent in Harlem than you would in Oklahoma or Alabama. And that's just it. As tough as the situation was for blacks in New York and in Chicago and in Detroit, they were living the good life compared to what most of the rest of the nation as black men were dealing with. And still today, it takes one little cinder to start a powder keg back on fire. One little cinder, one little spark, and we back at each other's throats. And the black community, like I said, I know hundreds of these people. I've seen their personal Facebook posts and photographs. They're just protesting. They're just bringing out their signs and saying, our lives should matter. These lives should count as well. And there's people in this nation that will not allow their voice to be heard. Whether it's Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, saying police brutality must stop, and we're going to turn that into, he hates the flag, he hates his country. Come on. It's insulting the way you can manipulate minds with the media and turn all these stupid fucks out here into believing that there's sinister purposes. Like blacks are just some... It's so insane. It makes me angry at times. I can't stand it. He gets in this fight in 48, and it leads him back in Bellevue. And then he ends up going to Creedmoor State Hospital for 11 months. So once again, he's being plucked right out of the jazz scene. Right out of some of the most vibrant years of his career. When he should be playing with all the greats in New York in the late 40s. He's in Creedmoor State Hospital for 11 months. It's sad. It's so sad. And some of it's his own doing. You know, some of it's your own arrogance and stubbornness, and again, he's somewhat detached from reality at times because of his conditions. So I don't know the reason why the fight happens, but it's still very sad that this guy got yanked out of the jazz scene for another year. He's in some psychotherapy in the hospital, and he speaks about how he feels persecuted and how he feels he's under attack all the time, and a lot of it stems from the racism in this country. These are his thoughts in hospital, expressing that there's a tension and a fear that he's always moments away from a possible ending. And those of you who watch The Sopranos, Tony Soprano talks about that impending doom, that weight piano falling on your head all the time. And there it's more him being caught or being shot by the police or by the FBI or by other mobsters, you know. But that anxiety that he talks about in therapy. Imagine being a black man where you can't wash your skin. You can't stop being a criminal. You can't move to Utah and have no one recognize you. You're still going to be black no matter where you go. And it's funny, one of the things that in anecdote is that white women, when they're shopping, if they're asked for assistance, they usually think it's a great, oh, that's so courteous of you, thank you. I don't need help, but thank you. Most black women, when they're shopping, if they're asked for help, they feel like they're being checked up on. Perceptions are such a strange thing. But it's just, we can't imagine what it's like to walk into a place and just because of this color of your skin, everyone's looking at you and keeping an eye on you. That's what you've lived through your whole life. It's just unfathomable. You know, again, I try to place myself in their shoes as a Canadian here in America. If Canadians were treated that way, and my stomach roils, I feel anxiety instantly trying to just even think about what it would be like, let alone living it day after day after day. So he tells the therapist about how he feels persecuted and it's due to racism in this country, and they end up giving him electroshock therapy, or I guess it's called electroconvulsion therapy now, from February through April. So February, March, April, 3 months, they're shocking this guy into seizures, thinking that's going to help him. And I guess a lot of it stemmed from an outburst he had about his girlfriend being pregnant. He got loud and boisterous about that, and they had to subdue him. They end up realizing it's not working. They try a couple other therapies, and they end up releasing him in October of 48. In 49, he has another brief hospital stay, which is just like part of this guy's life story, it seems like. He ends up doing some recordings in 49 for Blue Note, Mercury, and the Clef Norman Grand's label. And he's got kind of recordings spread out all over the place. And a lot of it gets culled onto the LPs. And it's kind of hard keeping some of it straight, somewhat like Charlie Parker. That era, it's just hard to say, okay, this is from that session, this is from that session. It takes a lot of research and digging. I only got so much time to put all this stuff together. In 49, I guess he has that brief hospital stay. His first Blue Note recording, he ends up doing a track called Infidels and Bouncing with Blood. This is Dance of the Infidels. Fats Navarro, Sonny Rollins, Roy Haynes, and Max Roach are on this. And there's no question that Bud's playing with a lot of the great players. You know, he's top of the mark when it comes to who his sidemen are, who he does work with, and he doesn't do a ton of side work. I'm guessing some of that is unpredictability and not knowing if he was actually gonna be there when the recording was scheduled. But Poco Loco and Parisian Thoroughfare are tracks that come in the second Blue Note session from 51. And some of these are considered some of the great bebop recordings of this era. You know, he canonizes bebop for the piano. And he's just a brilliant player, just fluid. And it'd be interesting to hear what his trajectory would have been had that first beating in Philadelphia not taken place. The headaches not set in. And then the endless medications and therapies and shock treatments that slowly just beat this man into the ground. It's so galling. Again, he had that rivalry with Parker. They feud on the bandstand. He's kind of getting a little bit more tempestuous as a personality, more difficult to work with. In 51 to 53, he's hospitalized again, this time stemming from a marijuana arrest. Smoked a joint, and you're a black man. Back to the nutty house for you. And there's no doubt that white kids are treated dramatically different. And you got to come to a point where you recognize that the injustice and how white criminals are treated versus black criminals is by design. It's not just, oh shoot, maybe you're going to notice that that's unfair. They want you to see it's unfair. They want black and white both to be outraged. They want the liberal people, the white American liberal people, to be outraged at the treatment of the blacks. Because in outrage, there's no common sense, there's no unity, there's no, we can work together. So liberals in this country are as positioned and put in place and trained how to think and behave as the conservative right-wing people are in this country. They're both complete products of two separate curtains on the same window. And there's media outlets that kind of inform one side and inform the other side, and they create this great standoff. And ne'er the twain shall meet. And it's by design. And that's why we have to be careful about outrage and being too politicized and being so willing to be wrapped up in what the moment's telling us to be. Because what we need to find is a center and empathy, and recognize that most of the evil being done is being done via an agenda, and that most people in their hearts do have some common sense. But if we never dialogue in a sensible way, we'll never see anything but you're crazy. And the status quo continues to remain. And this is all part of that same manic hysteria. Drives me crazy. So again, the marijuana arrest in 51. He goes back to mental hospital for a year and a half. He ends up being released in the custody of a guy by the name of Oscar Goldstein. Sounds like a Jewish fella. The owner of Birdland. And he ends up writing a song called Glass Enclosure in his reference to his pertinent imprisonment in Goldstein's apartment. And I guess being in a deluxe New York apartment beats being in prison. But all the same, it's still how he felt. In 53, he's part of this great concert in my hometown, Toronto. And what a group. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Bud Powell, Max Roach, and Charlie Mingus. It's one of the most all-star lineups you'll ever have in any jazz setting ever. It was released on the debut label, one of Mingus's little side labels. Short-lived, I'll add. It's not the best sounding recording. It's not even the best record. It's got some sound issues, and you can tell there's some conflicts going on with the guys. But all the same, those five guys on one stage together, it's an unprecedented moment, and one worthy of people owning and having and documenting. In 55, he's taken this medication called Largactil. I don't know nothing about it, but it affected his playing dramatically. And it made him kind of lose time and lose his feel. And that's just so sad. It's just so tragic that that's the trajectory these guys are allowed to take. And throughout this whole period, he is recording. He's doing a lot of stuff for Norman Granz. And this is some Verve issued stuff, Bud Powell Moods, piano interpretations by Bud Powell. But these both predate the LP era. And he's still recording for, I believe, Norman Granz into the mid-50s. And he got quite a bit of stuff on Verve. This is all I have of his Verve output. I need to find more. But again, you can only have so many records. Time and money, you know. Alfred Lion does manage to record him quite a lot. And those early two recordings, Volume 1 and Volume 2, from 49 and 51, are quite landmark and really display him at a high level. In 56, he records this session for Blue Note, and I think some of this might be a little earlier as well. I'm going to have to do a little quick research here on that. No, it looks like it's one session from '56, probably, with Bud Powell, Paul Chambers, Art Taylor, and Curtis Fuller. He liked playing with J.J. Johnson quite a bit from what I read, and so having Curtis Fuller on this isn't that much of a surprise, because Fuller is definitely J.J. Johnson's protege, as it were. But this is a great record, classic jazz reissue, and it looks like Fuller's only on 3 of the tracks, so this is recorded from 2 different sessions, and that's kind of the story with Bud. You know, he's got Time Waits, The Amazing Bud Powell, 1598. So this probably comes out in 1958, actually. Yeah. Sam Jones, Philly Joe Jones, and Bud Powell. So it's a trio. It looks like this one might actually be one session. But you can hear Monk at times, especially kind of in some of these late 40s, early 50s recordings. But again, there's that Parker bebop virtuosity that Monk's not really that guy. Monk's more of the reducer, the reductionist, where he's going to play blocks and make sounds and give you a whole different approach. What Monk did, that was his big innovation. Powell was the Parker of 90 miles an hour under control, like Dizzy. You know, Parker, Dizzy, and Powell were just a high level of virtuosity. This is the scene changes from 4009 on Blue Note, and again, this is probably from '58. And he's starting to show some of the signs on some of his later recordings of some of the mental illness and some of the effects of what's happened to him. The Delmark label puts out this recording, Bouncing with Bud, and I think this was recorded in Europe. Yeah, it is, with Niels Henning Orsted Peterson. I didn't realize that he was on this, actually. And William Schopfe, a name I'm not even familiar with. He's also does this recording with Dexter Gordon in Paris in probably '63, if I recall. So, the largactyl is affecting his playing, is affecting his personality, and Richie Powell, his brother, dies with Clifford Brown in a car accident in '56. So it's another further blow to this man's psyche. He's just starting to deteriorate. So in '59, he moves to Paris. He moves with his woman, Altivia Buttercup Edwards. And she ends up running his finances for him and issuing him his medications. They're living in a Paris Hotel La Louisiane. And he does quite a bit of recording over there. He's definitely deteriorating. And some of it's brilliant. Some of it's a guy on the edge of sanity. He contracts tuberculosis in 1963, around the time he's playing with Dexter Gordon in Paris. And at this point, the alcoholism is really taken over, and so his liver is really starting to deteriorate. His health is just going down the drain. In '66, he's in such disarray that he finally passes away. His body gives out. Malnutrition was deemed one of the purposes of his passing. Malnutrition. For a guy living in Paris and New York, you know, there's food everywhere. Alcohol and tuberculosis were also contributing factors. The praise that's given to this guy by some of the greats is pretty omnipotent. Herbie Hancock says he's the foundation from which stemmed the edifice of the modern jazz piano player. Herbie Hancock said so, not me. That's pretty high praise. Bill Evans has nothing but high praise for Powell and considers him his biggest influence. Horace Silver, Wynton Kelly, Andre Previn, McCoy Tyner, Cedar Walton, Chick Corea all acknowledge the debt they owed to Bud Powell, and they were all influenced greatly by him, according to their own words. He played arpeggios and chromaticism with the best of them. And that's just the notes that come in the chords, and the chromaticism is adding the half steps of the scales in between, which would be bebop was all about. And so he's just one of the true virtuosos of this music. But he was a victim of his skin color. Had the brilliance of this man been in a different package, he probably wouldn't have played the same music, because of the black experience dictates so much of how you interact with this world. But it's just so sad to hear this guy's story. You know, it almost moves you to tears just as you go through it and you realize that year after year after year, these great men have been just reduced and rendered down, beaten to a nub. And the fact that a lot don't make it through isn't that shocking. The fact that a lot of them turn to alcohol for solace isn't that shocking. The fact that heroin helps them escape the anxiety, the terror, the fear. I don't know what it's like to go out every day in my life and is today the day I get beat down again? You know, I experienced it briefly in school, I mentioned a few episodes ago, and it was tough as a 6th, 7th grader going through that. But as a grown man, imagine feeling that edge every time you left the building. And like he talked to his therapist and when he was in Bellevue, it's draining. It's exhausting to live in prejudice, in racism. And the toll that it takes reverberates through centuries. And so when you see what's happening now, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country, and even across the world, places like Germany, places like Toronto, Vancouver, they were having these big protests and assemblies of people saying, enough's enough. But the empire never takes too kindly to the opinion of the people. The masses matter not. The bottom line is all that really matters. So, again, it's heartbreaking, but he's such an important pillar in bebop's history and in the foundation of jazz piano, and all the greats that came in the 60s and 70s all admittedly owed Powell a huge debt. And we lost him way too young. And it's a very sad story, one of the sadder stories in jazz. But I felt like it was an appropriate time to talk about it, because the life of a black male is what's at stake. And it's what has so little worth, even in the world today. And if you go out there and you say, no, these black lives do have value, they do have worth, there's an entire movement of people ready to discredit that notion. And most of them are just pawns. Most of them are just idiots that have been miseducated and trained to fear and think they're being patriots. Most of them are just pawns. But there is an upper level elite that know how to turn this shit into dollars and cents. Guarantee you that's what's happening. And we're going to come out all of this with our tax bases being robbed again by the corporate elite, by the banking elite. We're going to be building extensions on their homes and new yachts for these people for centuries to come, it seems like. And we'll never have a strong middle class again as long as this persists. As long as the weak and the meek continue to be fodder for the cannon, justice will never be. But you'll never sleep. You know what I mean? I'm warning you, elite. Look over your shoulder. Because man might never get you, but karma will. Justice will. And I hope from wherever you end up cosmically, you can see the terror that you are giving to your grandchildren. Mark my words. What goes around does come around. And history will shift. Balances and alliances will change. And someday the meek will inherit the earth. Y'all be safe, be blessed. Buy your Bud Powell records. Talk to you soon. Peace.